Welcome back to the Get Mental podcast. My name is David Matthews, here again with our founder, CEO of Hearts and Minds, Trevor Conner. Trevor, how are you?
Feels spicy. Let's go.
I love that. Did you eat something spicy or?
Teriyaki jerky.
Well, then that makes sense. That checks out.
I have a reason.
I love the mango habanero mead that you made. I was tasting Trevor's mead. Trevor is a connoisseur within mead. The habanero is very spicy. So if you drank that / ate some spicy food, I completely understand why you are so spicy. Today we're doing something new. So we're going to do a little bit of a sports psychology roundup. We're looking to do this probably monthly. We're thinking about doing it bi-weekly. We'll see. I think monthly is a good cadence right now. Again, there's been so much going on within sports psychology. I feel like this is a really good time for us to kind of break down some of the news within sports psych, look at some of the trends, topics that are going on within our industry. There have been some really cool things, and we're hoping that individuals can learn something from this, right? Like athletes, parents, coaches, anybody who's tuning into this can learn something, and I want it to be short and sweet. So, yeah, you ready for this?
Let's roll.
Awesome. So recently in the news, this individual by the name of A.J. Brown, I don't know if you've heard of him. He is the wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, was spotted reading a book in sports psychology called Inner Excellence by Jim Murphy. During the game, I'm sure you've heard of this. A lot of people have seen it. It's gone viral on social media. The book in and of itself is really good. I started listening to it. I think I'm about 5 chapters in. And it's been flying off the shelves. Amazon, I think it reached the #1 bestsellers list on Amazon the day after this game. And they're in the playoffs right now. They're in the Super Bowl. Super Bowl is actually next week. So really quickly, this book focuses on really cultivating inner strength, focus, and a positive mindset, principles that really align with peak athletic performance. Brown mentioned in a lot of the interviews that the book has helped him mentally recalibrate, maintain focus, especially during high stress situations. Trevor, have you seen it? I've seen this, and what are your initial thoughts?
Initial thoughts. I was pretty impressed. First of all, curious. You have an NFL athlete on the sidelines reading a book, flipping through a book, and I believe the initial media reaction was actually very negative. Like, who does this guy think he is? Kind of a thing. Like reading a book during a game. Like, what the heck? What's wrong with this guy? And then come to find out, everybody's knee-jerk reaction was actually stupidly wrong. So I find it hilarious, but also not that surprising that people are wrong by making an impulsive, emotional knee-jerk reaction. We're talking like even YouTube creators are taking hot takes at this guy. And reality, he was doing it, and he said he's been doing this for a long time, and he reads in between drives. It helps calm him down, helps bring him peace. The concept, though, of reading something to recalibrate you during the middle of a game or a sports performance is not new at all. Like, I've been using this stuff for the last 10 years. Matter of fact, I've actually had a baseball guy pull out my book in the dugout and read excerpts from it to re-engage him. And it's the same guy that if you have my book, there's an image, I believe it's in right before or after the table of contents, and it's a guy, baseball guy, he's got his wrists wrapped and he writes ACE on the inside of his wrists. And he was doing this. He's a minor league baseball player, pro guy, but he wraps his wrists every single game, part of his pregame routine. He writes ACE on it. And then he would read excerpts every single half inning when he's in the dugout before he goes out. And he had them highlighted, he had them stickied or post-it noted. So, I mean, the concept of it's not new. Now, it might be new to a lot of people who have not heard of this or even just thought that this is a foreign idea, but like this didn't take me by surprise at all. If anything, it just brings positive light to what we do and really our field.
Completely. You're 100% accurate. Like, I had seen things like this before, and it's really funny. It just, again, went mega viral. And you're right. There was a lot of negative backlash in the beginning. Like, he's not paying attention. He's a diva, quote unquote. This individual is, and he kind of is, I have to say, like, AJ Brown plays with a lot of passion, but at the same time, he'll get in the quarterback's face or the offensive coordinator's face, and really just having some pretty candid dialogue, which I don't necessarily hate. But this book, again, is kind of just having him regain his mental and emotional composure why he's doing what he's doing. And within your book, and again, ACE, Attitude, Concentration, and Effort, if y'all want to pick that up, that is on the Amazon store. We'll link to that in the description of our podcast. But I think it's a really good thing mid-competition, mid-game, again, to just recalibrate. Now, a lot of the times within sports psychology, I know you know this as well, like we don't want to think too much. Right? Like we don't want to think that much. It may take us out of the game. It may alter our focus. I guess for you, what is the right balance of that? Like between reading a book, translating the book onto the field, should we be too much in our heads, or what does that look like? And I know it's highly individualistic for a lot of people, right? It may
Yeah.
work for me, it might not work for you to read a book, during the drive, as well as the coach's perception, right? Is he locked in? Is he not? Maybe I should talk to the coach before I open up my book. For those listening, what are some of your recommendations?
So I love how you said it is pretty individualistic. And like, let's be real. If Jim Murphy's book, Inner Excellence, if that was the end all be all, there'd only be one ever book written on this topic ever. Like the self-help book industry, when I was doing preliminary research before writing mine in 2019, it was like a $4 to $6 billion industry each year just in the West. Self-help books. And like, let's be real. If there's a silver bullet to this thing, we'd only have one approach. Like there is no silver bullet. So I don't think that's the attitude and approach. If you as an athlete are wanting to be able to utilize what AJ Brown did during the middle of the game, have a conversation with your coach up front. Tell them like this is what you would like to do. Some coaches are not going to be too keen on that. Some coaches are. Some sports that are fast action, they just don't even give time for that. Some sports, you actually come out. I'm thinking like hockey and like a line change. You come out, you're taking a break with your line. That might be a time. And instead of having a book, you might actually use like a refocus card. Let me grab this real fast. As we're talking, this what led to writing the second book. The second book, we did very little promotion with it and very little advertising. It's called Through the Athlete's Eyes. I co-wrote it with one of the guys on our team who is a former aspiring professional tennis player. And it's a performance analysis. So all it is very simple. It's a performance analysis. And if you're looking back at how you played against that team or that athlete or competitor before, you can look back at one or two notes in between a timeout or a change. And it doesn't even have to be in the form of a book. It could be something, a sticky note. I've used that before. I had an ATP top 20, top 30 tennis player, and we won a tournament together in 2019. And he, for about 5 matches during that run that we had, for I'd say probably about every other changeover that he was having in tennis, he was reminded to go and look at the note card. And the note card for him was as simple as bullet point 1 and bullet point 2. That was it. So every athlete's different. Some people, like AJ, apparently he's wanting to consume paragraphs. my baseball guy, it was purely about he wanted 1 or 2 bullet points. I am a fan, Dave, of simple is better. So I want my athletes to think less when they compete. It's going to bring in the zone and the flow state a lot quicker. So anyway, no, shameless self-promotion twice now, but seriously, that's why we wrote this book, is to be able to give it as really an advantage.
Certainly. And a lot of sports psychology and kind of what we do and how we coach athletes is pre and post, right? Before your competition, before, your performance, and then after. And sometimes that's the most impactful. And then during the actual performance, less is more. However, cues in your environment, I think, are extremely crucial. One of the tidbits in the book, actually, that talks about this is a 2008 Yale study. And bear with me, I want to kind of talk about this a little bit. They said that in the Journal of Science, it was 2008, Yale University psychologists showed that people's judgment of others to be generous and caring is if they held a warm or cold cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting. I don't know if you remember the study.
Yep.
Basically, what happened was on their way to judge an individual, right, on their personality, they met someone in the elevator. Right, just a random coincidence. Now, nothing's random in behavioral psychology. We do this stuff. It's quite interesting. We set people up to fail or to succeed. We just want to see how they're going to react. And so, in the elevator, this individual said, "Hey, I have to tie my shoe. Can you hold this cup of coffee?" And based on whether it was warm or cold, when they walked out of the elevator and then met the individual in the laboratory, and they assessed, hey, do you think that that person's personality was warm, or do you think that they were a little bit off-putting? And depending on what cup of coffee they had, it was statistically significant that if they had the warm cup of coffee, they would judge that individual as being warm, caring within their personality. And so this leads back to kind of exactly what we were talking about, just what you said with that ATP tennis player, where in your environment affects your thoughts. Your environment affects the way in which it influences your behavior. Essentially, they came up with this term called priming. We could prime your thoughts with different things in your environment. And so they kind of did other research on this topic, and they found that if you mention the word professor before a test, you're actually likely to do better. And if there's mention of like a different word, like low grade, I forget what it was, but you're likely to do less on that test. So this is kind of why self affirmations work. This is why vision boards work. This is why the people that you hang out with dictate your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions. So I love that AJ Brown was reading this book on the sideline, and I love that, and I hope that athletes kind of take something from this and understand that there is more to priming my environment to kind of dictate whether or not I'm going to get into the flow state, whether I'm going to manage my emotions, whether I'm really going to perform at my best. And so I think there's a lot that we can kind of take away from this.
Totally. We're a huge believer, by the way, in priming and being able to teach athletes about priming, but parents have an active role in that too. And I think if parents understood the concept, I bet that car ride on the way to the event or even on the way home could go a lot better and a lot smoother. So when we do parent education in parent workshops, we will teach on this topic and really just giving them an opportunity to leverage the playing field in their athlete's favor. So those are fun conversations to have too.
I think that's a really good point. Parents that are helicopter parents, the debrief and the car ride home is always the worst, right? I mean, there are memes about it, there are videos about it, there are horror stories about it. I mean, athletes that I've met have been like, oh, Dave, I absolutely dread after the match when I have to sit in my car and drive home, and my dad or mom is like, hey, this is how that went, right? Instead of asking, how did you feel? Right? What were some things that you did well? What were 3 things that you'd like to improve? Right? And kind of keeping a little bit more neutral and blaming things on the coach. I mean, there's so many things that kind of come out of that. But yeah, parents, I think that you dictate your athlete's mental state in the environment that you create for your athlete to perform well is highly important.
I would go as far as to say is they're force multipliers. You're going to multiply the effect of whatever's going on. And by the way, the time to debrief the match, the game, the event, whatever that you just got done competing is not in the moments afterwards, good, bad, or ugly. The frontal lobe of the brain is so undeveloped for these young kids, all the way up till about 25 years old. Most research agrees 25 is about that standard where the brain fully develops. So you as the adult, you have the privilege of being able to sit off to the side, watch straight up armchair quarterback style. You're not actually there on the free throw line. You're not actually doing the line changes. You're not actually the one hitting the tennis ball or tackling the guy or missing the tackle. You're not the one on the field or in the batter's box doing it. You have that observer view, and you can see angles and things that they possibly can't. So best time to debrief and to actually talk about it, especially if there's opportunities to get better, within a couple of hours. Give it at least one, if you can, 2-hour cool down period. If you can wait the whole night, wait the whole night. Give their brain a chance to be able to process and digest, even though that athlete may want to talk about it. I coach parents on just pump the brakes, hit the pause button, let them digest, let them debrief, but don't engage with them. Three of the most powerful things you can tell a kid after their match, by the way, or tournament or game. I enjoyed watching you play. I love you. What do you want to eat?
I love that. Yeah. And then leave it at that. Yeah, because I mean, the emotional charged athlete is going to be looking for validation, and that's validating the negative or the positive, right? And kind of again looking towards that parent to affirm whether they are I mean, worthy of them, whether they love them or not. And I know that it seems a little drastic, and at times it can be. At times maybe it's not. It's super innocuous, but just I love those three steps, right? Acknowledging them, that you love them. What do you want to eat? What was the other question?
I enjoyed watching you compete.
Yeah,
Even though it may have been a horrible performance, doesn't matter. Like, I enjoyed watching you. Why? Because I love you. Okay, cool. That feeds into point two. But the other one is what you're talking about. Validation is, it's your baby out there. It's your kid. It's your precious one. And they're, even though they may have had a tough loss, like, they're doing that sport deep down. Besides the win and loss, besides the recruiting, they're doing that sport because they enjoy it at a depth level, and that has to be reinforced and that has to be reminded, because the higher up levels that you go, that love may go deeper and it may go out in different branches, but that's the really central root. And most kids, they get into sports because they enjoy it, and when you lose that love, there's a lot of other problems that spin off of it, and they don't play that sport for a long time. So you need to foster that and welcome that and encourage it. And yeah, that I can't say I've saved families. I think that would be pretty. I think that'd be saying it wrong. But let's just say this: I think we've helped curb a lot of conflict in families, just because you're teaching parents exactly what to say and how to go about helping their athlete immediately after the match, immediately after the game, because a lot of parents will communicate back, my athlete is such a bad mood when they strike out, when they're such in a bad mood when they don't play well, they're in such a bad mood because coach yelled at them and got really on them that day. Okay, well, that's the coach's job. Your job is to be the parent and to love your kid unconditionally. Show them.
I love that. Again, the environment towards the parents create the environment for the child to succeed, right? Are you creating the right environment, right? And I think that's a good challenge and a good question to ask yourselves as parents, as listening to this podcast is, am I creating that environment for individuals to succeed? And I think that's a really good segue into and if you're not, or if your coach is getting on you, just give them a hot cup of coffee.
Yes.
May influence
Yes.
the way in which
Yes.
they approach you. Hey, best of luck, AJ Brown. Best of luck to the Philadelphia Eagles. I know that we'll probably be talking about the Super Bowl maybe next podcast. But again, I think that this is a great segue into our next topic of conversation, which is Madison Keys. And Madison Keys won the Grand Slam victory recently. I think that was this past week. And she had a mental breakthrough. And in talking about that mental breakthrough, she recently won her Grand Slam title at the U.S. Open. Keys spoke about overcoming internal pressures that she had placed on herself, including the belief that her life would be incomplete if she didn't win a major. Right? And again, kind of setting up the environment plays a really big role, right? Our thoughts, our parents, coaches, and maybe she's been receiving some messages that it's either all or nothing, right? And maybe her self-worth is kind of wrapped up in that. And so she credited her success to shifting her mindset and letting go that she needs to prove herself, and instead focusing on being proud of who she is, regardless of the outcome. And it's, again, a sobering reminder of how much pressure I think that we put on a lot of these athletes. But Trevor, I want to kind of throw it over to you. How does this internal pressure affect performance? And what does become a roadblock rather than a motivator? Rather, does it become a roadblock rather than a motivator?
I think, and I mentioned it in my first book, but boy, simple works really, 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 really well. I think there's a lot of athletes that are driven by outcomes. They're driven by results. They're driven by status. They're driven by trophies. They're driven by trying to prove something to others, i.e. Madison Keys. She's trying to prove something. Well, what's she trying to prove? Like, other people's opinions are dictating her own happiness or success levels. But she, according to what you just shared, paraphrase, she credited her success by shifting her mindset. Okay. So what that tells me is this has been said a lot. Nick Saban brought it onto the stage with Alabama, and he made it even more popular. Process wins. A lot of athletes will get to certain levels of success by chasing outcomes because they're super talented. They are very passionate. They're really good. Let's even say they have a lot of success. But you can't build a career on chasing outcomes. You can't build a successful career. It's kind of like those athletes sometimes, Dave, and you know them too. The athletes will come to you and say, "Well, listen, when I get mad or when I get like really angry, on the court or in a match or in a game, I play better." And like, yeah, that's cool. That's a one-off event, maybe a three-off event, but you can't build a whole season playing angry and mad and expect to play at a high level all the time. It will have a fatiguing effect that it will show up at some point. You cannot play that way the whole time. It's catharsis has been proven not to work. That's taking your anger out on an object to feel better, like a mental release, emotional release. That doesn't work. And I think a lot of times athletes, when they're chasing success, they're chasing results, they're chasing outcomes and trophies. They find themselves chasing all the wrong things, and therefore they start to lose track of some of the things that really matter, and that is how to win. Saban said it best, process wins. Okay, so everybody's process looks a little bit different. And I think that's where it kind of gets lost in translation. Enter the gray zone. What makes Madison Keys win is probably a little bit different than made, I don't know, Naomi Osaka win. Their process is going to be a little bit different. What does she eat? How does she train? What's her nutrition like? What's her sleep schedule like? What's her play style like? What's her training style? Like how many hours on court? It's going to look different than hers. It just is. So a lot of athletes are looking for the silver bullet. It just doesn't exist. So you got to work together with your coaches and you got to trace back success. When you were having success, what were you focused on? What were you doing? How consistent were you? How disciplined were you on the X's and O's on top of everything else? There's a really good saying. We use it a lot. Success leaves clues behind it. So does failure. They both do. So what we do is we really try and help athletes shift their focus from being outcome driven and focused. And you get so siloed on chasing the trophy. We shift that from there over to, okay, let's identify what does playing at a very high level look like on a constant, consistent basis. When you can identify that and you can define that, that trophy now becomes easily attainable or easier to obtain.
Yeah, I love that. And it really, again, points to this kind of selfless pursuit. It is selfish, I guess, in a way. But if you kind of put yourself to give yourself up to something completely noble, a noble effort, I think that is kind of where it unlocks performance. And I think a lot of individuals, and again, maybe this is the advent of social media, they do it for the wrong reasons. They do it for the likes, for the NIL deals, for the money, the status, all of these things. And look, there have been plenty of individuals that talked about this before. I'm not the last one. Nothing new under the sun.
Yep.
But when are you going to learn? Right? And how are you not going to get caught up in it? And I think that those are really big questions, because even though we know these things to be true, there's a gap between our intention and our behavior, right? Or our thoughts.
So there's a really good point to this. Let me just tie a deeper connection to it, because you just mentioned there's nothing new under the sun. I agree with that. Let me draw your point on a bigger context. So here at Hearts and Minds, we believe obviously on helping athletes mentally. We obviously help them as much as we can, working with their physical coaches and wherever they're at. We also care about the emotion, but we also care a whole lot more about who you're becoming as a human being, including spiritual. So Hearts and Minds, yeah, we're a Christian-based, non-denominational based company. But here's something really interesting, Dave, that you just said. I want to draw your point to, because you're like, this is a bigger question. Okay, when Jesus was tempted, it literally says Jesus was driven into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit. Now check this out. This is really cool. Broken down into three parts. There were three temptations that came at him. One was the lust of the flesh. One was the lust of the eyes. And the third was the pride of life. The third temptation, Satan literally said to him, and he says, hey, bend down, worship me, and I'll give you everything. And that's the pride of life. That same temptation happens in our hearts and our minds, in our athletes all the time. And what you're talking about, the likes, the clicks, the additions, the trophies, the status, the NIL, that's the pride of life. It just is. So at what point does an athlete have to rectify that and have to do that? Well, and deal with it? Listen, you can have a lot of success chasing the pride of life until one day chasing those outcomes just doesn't work. And then when that happens, you're going to get humbled real fast. And then sadly, you come to us and we're picking up the puzzle pieces and trying to piece it back together. The simple solution in this is go about this with obviously chasing what it is that you're chasing, right, from a process standpoint, but also with, and Corey on our team, he doesn't like this word, but we understand each other why we disagree on this. But it's going about what you do with a humility, but a swagger.
Hmm.
And I think that sometimes we think of the word humble as like subservient and like passive. I don't think that's what it is, especially in the athletic realm. You got to have the humility to respect your opponent, but also know I'm going to go destroy this guy.
Yeah.
That's swagger. I got to have the humility to recognize that they do this really, really well as a team against us, but we're prepared. And I have the confidence and assurance to go and attack and do this at a high level. So I could give a lot of different examples, but I think athletes are so absorbed into this pride of life mentality that they get it from everywhere. They get it from their socials, they get it from their phones, they get it from their friends, they get it from trying to keeping up with the Joneses. And like, why? You're literally walking right into that trap. So my humble opinion opinion on this is you have to walk with a sense of humility of knowing that, like, no matter how good you are, like, I'm sorry to say this, you're probably not that special,
Yeah. You're
but you can show up and you can compete hard and work your butt off and be the toughest athlete out there on that day.
completely. And exactly what you're saying kind of also is we mentioned the book Inner Excellence and how I'm listening to it right now. And I want to circle back to why Corey doesn't believe in that, because that irks me deeply. He tells a story in the book that's just dedicated this whole chapter to samurai. And if you
Yeah.
think about ancient samurai in Japan and in Asia, parts of Asia, there was so much humility amongst that group of individuals, but they were flat out killers. Like
Fierce.
they were absolutely, yeah, the most fierce, but they were also morally just. They were very honor based and extremely humble individuals, but they would still, like, they were still savages. They still performed at a high level, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
In the book, there's a story about a samurai who, one of the things about the samurai code was that if you said anything bad about another samurai, you would be asked to take your own life.
Hmm.
Now, if you think about that, there is so much of a lack of ego, but also it's funny, and maybe it's not funny to talk about that, especially when it comes to like mental health, and I don't want this to get confused, especially take your own life. But think about that. Like they would willingly, if their leader said, we want you to do something that drastic, they would have to do it to themselves. They wouldn't be put to death by someone else. They would have to do it themselves. And they were honored to do it because that is the code that they lived by. And I thought that, like, again, that chapter really stuck out to me. And as it relates to this, I think it's a really interesting thing because, again, what are you doing this for? What code do you live by? Do you have your moral integrity in order? And are you doing these things for the right reasons? And what you may think are the right reasons may not be. And again, that's kind of a soul searching effort in and of itself. So yeah, I love being humble with swagger. And kind of that dichotomy is kind of this tension I think that exists within all athletics.
Well, I mean, where's that line? Where do you draw that line? I think you draw it by internally and also external observation. Sometimes you can't see your own blind spots, and you have to rely on trusted individuals to say, okay, listen, you hit that home run, and yeah, I know you're proud and stuff, but you really pimped it and you really, really, really dishonored, let's say you brought all the wrong attention to the team versus you hit it, you're proud, you're excited, but you can have some class about it too. So there's a fine line. Where is that at? I think you do it situationally and also knowing, has it changed you morally? Has it changed you internally? Or is it in the process of changing you? I mean, it's kind of like this, you stick your big toe in quicksand, it's not a big deal. You stick your foot in quicksand, not a big deal. You take 2 steps in quicksand, now it's a big deal. So you have to, I think you individually, you got to figure out where that line is for you. Um, if you're going to err on one side of it, I think there's a lack of confidence right now in athletes. And I think there's a lot of fake confidence. There's a lot of ego beaten, chest beaten, like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And we deal with a lot of the fake confidence too. Oh yeah, I got no confidence problems. And then I spend one session with him and we're talking about internal self-talk. What are you saying to yourself? I'm like, dude, you're such a fraud. So if you're going to err on one side of it, I think it needs to err on the side. And Dave, you and I, we did a podcast on this a long time ago. Err on the side of assurance. It's not confidence. It's you're so sure of yourself that your belief and conviction is so raw and real that you know you're going to be able to go and compete. That doesn't include beating your chest. If you're going to err on that side or the humble side, I would err on the being assured of who you are and what you're confidently assured that you can go do in a game or in a match. And a lot of that comes down to preparation. A lot of that comes down to what you've done previously too.
Yeah, that assurance, that faith that I can do these things. I mean, that's kind of where this confidence comes from. For Madison Keys, I think it was really interesting when I was reading the article. She said something to the effect of, and I'll just paraphrase it or summarize it, like when you stop striving so hard for something, it frees you up to actually achieve it. And I thought that was a really powerful thing to say. And so it's kind of like, how can athletes balance ambition and acceptance?
I got a whole article I wrote years ago about the difference between trying hard and playing hard. But by the way, there's scientific studies. I'm thinking of one of a power lifter that goes out and they tested a whole bunch of power lifters on strenuous activity and work versus just do the best you can. The ones that were doing the best that they can actually outperformed the weightlifters who knew what the weight limits were and what it was like, I think we were doing hang cleans and I think it was like 225. And they had the measuring bars that were measuring the speed and the velocity of how fast you clean that bar.
Yeah.
Maybe it was like 275. I forget. It was not a super heavy weight, but they were measuring the speed and the velocity of it. Well, one of them was the power lifters were measuring that according to what they believed was possible. And the other ones were moving it at about, I think it was like 2x faster and quicker because they didn't know what was possible, but they knew that they were going to give their best effort. It's kind of like if you go down to pick up a dumbbell, right? And the dumbbell says 25 pounds, but you don't realize it. You just see 25 and you think it's 25 pounds. Well, a kilo weighs more than a pound. And you recruit the strength to pick up 25 pounds, but then come to find out, you pick it up and you can still pick it up. But it's like, oh my gosh, that's heavy. And you look at it and it says kg, kilograms. 25 kilograms, that's pretty heavy, right? So you can still do it. But like when you go down with the expectation of knowing where that is and where that strength is, and then you get a surprise, now you have to recruit more energy versus if you know that's going to be over 50 pounds, oh, I'm going to recruit different muscles to help me, you know? Yeah. And I think similarly, it works in the same when it comes to mental.
Yeah, where there is that like kind of expectation, expectancy theory, I think is kind of some of the things that we talk about in the science realm of, you know what 25 pounds is. Therefore, your brain is automatically recruiting the muscle fibers necessary to pick up 25 pounds. And then you're shocked when you're like, oh, wait, this is 25 kilos. Right. And so it's, again, tricking your mind into, and I love the study that you said, and maybe we could put that in the show notes, surrounding individuals that were like, try your best, right? We're cued for that, actually perform better than the other group of individuals. What were the other group? What was their cue?
Yeah, the other cue was do your best. One was do your best, and the other one was, hey, you're going to lift. I think it was like you're going to clean 275, and you're just going to do it based on how quick can you get it up, how quick can you clear it. So those guys, they're essentially just trying to outcome driven perform, and the other guys are like, I have no idea how heavy it is, but I'm going to do the best I can. Those guys outperformed the other guys because they didn't know what the expectation was. They didn't know what the outcome was supposed to be. So they just competed hard, did their best, and boom, they did better. So that's an old study, really old study. I think it was like from 2010 10 or 11. I remember reading in 2013 when I was in Ohio.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I'll have to dig that up because I think that's super cool. As well as, again, it points to this, what do they call it? Like taking a sugar pill, like placebo kind of
Yeah, yeah,
effect, right?
placebo.
And if you blind test someone versus they actually know what the weight is, or whatever it is, then, they're likely to perform worse. I like that. And, yeah, it also reminds me of the backwards law. I don't know if you've heard of this law, but the backwards law is super interesting, where it just says trying too hard to get what you want in life, like love, respect, happiness, often has the opposite effect. Right? You feel lonely if all that you want in life is love. You feel dejected if you want respect. If you want happiness, then you're actually miserable. Right. So the backwards law is really interesting where we think of it more linear, right? The more effort that I put into something, the more likely I am to achieve that thing. But with life, it really doesn't work that way, right? In athletics, especially like weightlifting, it works that way. Where, I mean, there is a law of diminishing returns, but the more time that you put into something, like lifting weights, etc., the more likely you are to see a linear outcome, right? Progress. But within the backwards law, it's a really interesting thing. So I just wanted to kind of put that on our radar to really understand and kind of drive this point home that, when you stop striving so hard for something, which is what Madison Keys was doing, it actually frees you up to actually achieve it. And I think that that's just such a beautiful thing to do. We're not saying don't try hard, but what we're saying really is just to understand more of these laws and of, are you doing it for the right reasons? What are they? Because if you're not, then you're going to have anxiety, or for lack of a better term, nerves, stress, feelings that you're not good enough, low self-satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Versus if you are doing it for the right reasons, have some self-compassion, stop striving so hard, give yourself some breaks. You may actually achieve what you want to. So yeah, keep that in mind. I think it's a really interesting thing to kind of talk about and to think about. All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to our first episode of the Sports Psychology Roundup, with myself, Dave, and with our CEO and fearless leader, Trevor Conner. This is a really good wrap, man. I really appreciate it. Let's see us next time. Please tune in. Give us a follow at hmperform.com on all social medias, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever, TikTok, we're even on, if it's still around, which it is. Give us a follow over there. We'd really appreciate that. Or look at us on YouTube if you want to see us in real life. You could also find this podcast on Spotify. Please share it with anybody, parents, coaches, athletes that you think that would benefit from this. Trevor, I will see you next time on our next Sports Psychology Roundup.